right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started, knowing that we'll probably have folks popping in and joining us, but I want to make sure we're able to make the most of our time together today. So I want to say hello and welcome to all of you to our Urban Engagement Entwined conversation. On behalf of IRSlice, the Board of Directors, and the Special Programming Committee, I want to welcome you. If we haven't had the opportunity to meet, although I see lots of friends in the room, my name is Becca Berkey, and I have been a member of the board since 2017. I've served as the conference content committee chair, on the executive committee as vice chair and then chair, and currently I'm co-chairing the scholarship and publications committee. I live and work, and I'm coming here today from Boston, Massachusetts, where I serve as the director of community engaged teaching and research, and currently serve as the interim director of our honors program at Northeastern University. Given that we have so much to discuss today with such a limited time, I'm going to jump right in. So just to remind folks that you saw this framing when you signed up for today's conversation, but I just want to provide a reminder of the framing of today's conversation. So we're navigating a moment in the community engagement field when we continue to contend with the challenges brought about by COVID and reckon with the realizations of how our work disrupts or supports identity-based oppression. As scholarship continues to emerge on these distinct and intersecting forces, we want everyone today, along with our panelists, to reflect on how urban institutions and communities in the US and around the world, and we'll hear from both today as well, are learning from the recent past to innovate approaches, reshape practices, and reimagine possibilities for the future of higher education and community engagement. I am honestly, truly honored to be convening today's panelists. We've had some conversations leading up to today, and you all are in, I think, for a real treat in hearing about their experiences and their partnerships with one another. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to them to go ahead and provide introductions to themselves. So I believe we're going to start out with Stephen, and then we'll move around our group for today. So Stephen, if you want to kick us off with your introduction, that would be wonderful.
Right. Okay. I'm Stephen Chen. I'm a consultant at the Service Learning and Leadership Office at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. We are located in Hong Kong. And since we are talking about identity, let me just elaborate a little bit on where we are and who we are. Myself, I'm Chinese. I was born in Hong Kong. I've been teaching at Hong Kong Polytechnic University for 30 years now. Before that, I spent about 6 years in Canada, and before that, about 12 years in the States, mostly in upstate New York, but also in Wisconsin. And before that, I came originally from Hong Kong. Now that means I have been in Hong Kong, Canada, US, and then back in Hong Kong. Now, when I was born in Hong Kong, when I grew up in Hong Kong, we were a British colony. And then in 1997, we were returned to China. So when you talk about identity, there is a lot of different roles that we have played. Let me also explain a little bit about the composition of our students. Now, the majority of our students come from Hong Kong, Chinese from Hong Kong. We also have quite a large group from mainland China. They're also Chinese, but they are from mainland China. For those of you who are familiar with the history of Hong Kong is part of China, but Hong Kong is kind of half west and half east, while China is, of course, east. So between the students, the Chinese students from mainland China and the students from Hong Kong, there are many issues of identity in terms of culture, politics, economic system, concepts of the democracy and that kind of thing. So that's the background of where we are coming from. Okay. Who's next?
We'll move over to John.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm John Karenzi, and I'm the country director for African Evangelistic Enterprise, which is a local organization that partners with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And we, as an organization, we are located in Rwanda, and Rwanda, of course, is a small country that has 12 million Rwandans, and the population in urban is close to 28, and the rural is 72.1, and life expectancy is 72. And I think now that we are talking about the university and service learning, I just need to say a few things about the education levels in Rwanda. 15.1% of our population have secondary level education, and 3.3% of our population has university level education, and that is quite a challenge. And again, as background of what we do with the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong, we have 61% of our population having access to electricity, and then we have 17% of our population having access to water. And so that's the background, and that is who we are as an organization and a country.
All right, Matthew, if you want to go next, and then Terrace to round us out for introductions.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever folks are. My name is Matthew Darrington. I'm an anthropology professor, and I'm also in an administrative role as executive director for community engagement and partnerships for Towson University. Towson University is located 400 feet north of Baltimore City in Baltimore County, and we have a student population of about 24,000, which is essentially doubled in size for the 20 years that I've been at the campus. And we were the first institution in Maryland to get the Carnegie Community Engagement classification. And also we have a very strong community engagement and partnership framework that's been helped by it being a presidential priority for the last 5 years.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Terrace King II here in Baltimore City. I'm a tenured kindergarten teacher, and that's how we made our connection with Towson University. I've taught kindergarten for 15 years, forms-based teacher here in Baltimore at Park School of Baltimore, and ended up at Shanghai American School, which is why this conversation is so exciting for me, because of COVID and how through an emergency situation here in Baltimore City, the disparity when it came to children outdoors, we were able to partner with Towson University. I'm head of schools and transitioned from my role as a kinder teacher to now found a school system here in Baltimore that organizes what we call the Sacred Trinity. I am a second generation preacher's kid from the city. So we organize faith leaders and their congregations. We organize and support research institutions in the area and across the country. And we organize all of these efforts around city schools. And so I work with Act Now Baltimore here in city, 25 really powerful faith leaders that are pushing for accountability in the city and beyond. So I'm honored to be here today to have this conversation about demographics. And here in Baltimore, we are in a city that is in desperate need of change, a city with very high murder rates, children who are not being served when it comes to city schools. So yes, excited to be here today to share.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those introductions and telling us a little bit more about the communities that you are in and representing in this conversation today. I did just put a quick reminder in the chat, if anybody who, when you're not talking, if you can put yourself on mute, because there's some weird feedback happening on my end. I don't know if that's happening for others, but just a reminder. And then before I kick us off into some of the different framing of the questions for today, I just want to let folks who are joining us know we're really hoping that we'll have time for questions and answers at some point during today's conversation. If you want to just make note in the chat of questions as they're coming up for you, people can kind of try to address them during the course of the conversation. And again, if we have time at the end, we may have some time for discussion as well. So feel free to use our chat function. We're a fairly small group having this conversation today, at least thus far. And so I think we can be fairly conversational as we kind of dive into the different topics that we'll be hearing from. So I'm going to start out by having each one of our, and if you didn't get from the introductions, these are kind of two pairs of partners who have worked together in some really interesting ways. And we want to hear a little bit about each of your partnership stories, right? And so kind of starting today out, building off of just hearing about the demographics of your communities and the sort of community settings that you're in, you know, how have you partnered and what are the ways that the pandemic or either shifted or impacted your work? I know it's different for each of your partnerships. One of them was kind of born of that time period, and one of them had to shift pretty dramatically. So Stephen and John, we'll start out with you to talk a little bit about your partnership between PolyU and Rwanda, and then Terrace and Matthew will shift over to you after that. So go ahead and take it away, Stephen.
All right. Now, let me also continue to say a little bit about our students. The students, Chinese students from Hong Kong, which is our largest group, we speak a dialect of Chinese called Cantonese. Just never mind, it's just a dialect. But the students of mainland China, they speak another dialect of Chinese, sometimes called Mandarin, sometimes called Putonghua. The point to remember is that these two dialects are so different, they might as well be two different languages. Basically, you do not understand each other unless you learn the other dialect. And Hong Kong has been ruled by the British for more than 100 years. We have recently, we got returned to China in 1997, but we retain a lot of that Western practice, culture, language, and so on, while China remains communist, right? So keep that in mind. These two groups of students, they look the same, but they are, converted from they have very different identities. Now, when service learning has been practiced at our university since 2010, we require every undergraduate student to take at least one course in service learning. When we take two groups of students and serve in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong students has an advantage because they know the language and so on. When we take these students to serve in China, the students from China, mainland China, has an advantage. So we take them both to Rwanda, where nobody has an advantage. Everybody is equally disadvantaged. That's one of the reasons why we are so keen to take them away from so-called Greater China. And of course, Africa, Rwanda has a special attraction to us because it is so far away, it is so different. We want to challenge our students. So that's the main reason why we bring them over to Rwanda. I'll let John talk about the genocide and things like that, but let me just talk a little bit about what we do over there. Now, initially, when we went over there, my background is in IT. I'm an engineering professor, so we started by servicing people by focusing on providing computers, workshops, and training so that people can use computers, can use social networks, and so on. That's what we started doing in 2013 when we first went to Rwanda. But then after a while, after interacting with John's team and so on and so forth, we realized that the need is a lot more basic. Not only do they not have computers, they don't even have electricity. Without electricity, they cannot run computers. So then we move on to do solar panels so that they can have at least have electricity, they have lighting, and then they can move on to other things. So for the past, I think 6 or 7 years, we focus on installing solar panels so that people can have electricity. And before the pandemic hit, we regularly install up to 200 solar panels for 200 households, joining with John's team and also local volunteers from the village, from the community where we are doing this solar panels. So that's pretty much what we do. And what we learned from Rwanda is, of course, a lot about resilience. They are very poor. They're recovering from the genocide. So we learn about reconciliation, which they put a lot of effort in. And we felt that is important for us because we are dealing with a lot of conflicts between different groups and students from China, students from Hong Kong, politics, economic systems, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the many, many things that we learned from working in Rwanda.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. This is John Kalenzi once again. I will just say a few things about our partnership with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I think there are some echoes. I don't know what is happening. So our partnership, as Stephen mentioned, has been on for quite some time. And I will begin with what happened before the COVID-19 and what has happened since the COVID-19 pandemic. So before the COVID-19 happened, of course, we're in touch with the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong, and the university had her own objectives, and the aid Rwanda had her own objectives. And so the first thing we did was actually to agree on how we could align our objectives, because our objectives were kind of different, but we had some point of intersection. So we kind of discovered that point of intersection, and that was the first thing that we did. And of course, after aligning our objectives as two institutions, the next thing we did was to have some joint planning. So we had planning online. We had several meetings with the leadership of Polytechnic University of Hong Kong that was actually spearheaded by Stephen and his colleagues. So we agreed on what to be done and how it could be done, and the timelines and the logistics and other things. And then, of course, there was another session of preparing the students, both in person and virtually. The university prepared the students, but also we gave our inputs from our perspective. We would have the online meetings and then give the students a chance to ask questions and give them the exposure, tell them what they are likely to encounter when they come this end, and what they are likely to see, and the lifestyles and other things, and the culture, just to kind of prepare them for what they would face if they came to Kigali. And of course, the next thing we would do be to bring the students over, and they go to the communities where we are running projects, and they provide a service. As Stephen mentioned, that first they were in the computer, they would do lots of things. They would install computers and in schools, in poor schools, and help young people to learn how to use computers and do basic things. And then later on, we actually talked with them and realized that the need was so huge because it was not possible to use computers when there is no electricity. And that is how the need was attended to. And actually, I want to take this time and thank Stephen and his colleagues, because they were flexible. They accepted to adjust to our community needs. And so moved from the computers to solar panels, and they installed solar panels in the communities where lighting was needed the most. But unfortunately, in the course of doing that, of course, COVID came. And when COVID came, of course, lots of things had to change. First of all, as an organization, we had to make sure that we increase our communication budget, because we had to offer services remotely to the community members, which wasn't easy, but we had to do that. We had to teach our staff to provide remote services to the communities. But at the same time, we're lucky that the university, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, accepted to take the challenge and take the advantage of the opportunities that had been provided by the pandemic. And so we kept on, we didn't just fold our hands and say, well, pandemic is here, students cannot move to Kigali, and so we have to wait until the pandemic comes to an end. So that idea of embracing the challenge and saying, well, we have challenges at hand, but also have an opportunity is something that we commend about Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So we moved from bringing people over here to online service provision. So the university taught our young people how to install the computers online, and then they also worked with them remotely. And of course, we're lucky that service provision kept on happening. And I think the students also kept on learning. Of course, they did not have the in-person interaction, but learning still happened. And so what is it that we did? Of course, the first thing we did was to embrace the challenge and look for the opportunities that were presented as a result of the pandemic that had happened. But the next thing that happened was to both our institutions to encourage innovation and creativity, because it's something that we had not done. We had not rendered services to community members remotely. So that encouragement also helped us to not to have a total breakdown of service provision. There was this commitment from the Polytechnic University, Hong Kong Polytechnic University, to encourage students to be innovative and to be creative. And then we were also prepared to encourage our community members also to open up and adapt, and encourage our staff to have some adaptability. So that is what happened. But of course, on our side, we also had to make sure that we adjusted our policies and procedures, because as I was telling you, we had no experience to offer services remotely. And so we had to really look at our policies, we had to modify our policies and our procedures to make sure that we accommodated the crisis. And I think in the interest of time, I would say that even during the COVID, learning still happened, because the students from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University had to really think through, how do we work with these young people in Kigali who are not familiar with the computer system, who are having infrastructure barriers. And that was figuring out how to work with our young people who are having language barrier, who are having infrastructure barriers, who are not familiar with computers. Really called for learning on the side of the students. It also called for some adaptability, because that is not something that they were not used to as well. They used to come here, meet with our young people in a hall, and then train them and demonstrate. And so there was learning on the side of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University students, but there was also learning on our side. And there was service provision, of course, because solar installation was still happening remotely. And I think the students also got the chance to demonstrate the skills that they had learned in the classroom, because what was different is that this time they were doing it by computers, and initially they used to do it physically. They would come here and do the demonstration. So I think, of course, there are things that we have missed. One is that we missed that personal interaction. Our people missed the opportunity to interact with the students from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And I would like to mention that personal interaction was also one of the contributing factors to community satisfaction. Because of what happened here, Rwandese thought that the whole world hated us and nobody liked us. And so when you go in the poor communities and you have these so many students who are of different language and different skin color and so forth, interacting with our people somehow contributed to their satisfaction. So we missed that. That did not happen. And of course, training our young people, because when the students come here and their professors, they not only install the solar panels, but they build the capacity of our young people and our community members, so that if something breaks down when they have gone back to Hong Kong, then there's somebody to repair the system. So the first thing they do is that they really do the training of our young people. And, training remotely, it reduced the number of students who would be trained. That's the number of young people who would be trained because of the barriers, the infrastructure barriers, because of the language barriers, because of so many other factors. So the number of young people who were trained by the students remotely actually went down. And of course, on our side, we spent a lot of money because we had to kind of upgrade our infrastructure, at least to be able to even accommodate the few that were trained. I think that is what I would say. We've learned a few lessons. We've learned that, for partnership to be successful, there has to be an alignment of objectives. If there is no alignment of objectives for different institutions, then partnership cannot be successful. We've learned that there has to be some more collaborative leadership. I am not an employee of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, neither Stephen is not an employee of AE. So for us to work together, really, there has to be some consensus building. If there is no consensus building, we can't really make it. And we've also learned that for partnership to be successful, there has to be some value creation. Like I was telling you, only 17% of our population have access to electricity. So it's like when they come here and they begin to install solar panels, they are scratching our people where we are eating, and people can easily embrace that initiative. I think I would also mention that our partnership has been successful because the Polytechnic University embraced localization. They just put themselves in the shoes of the service users. And that has really made our people to like them and to enjoy them and to support them and to embrace everything that they share. So I think that's what I would say. We've been able to act very swiftly, and that has helped us during the COVID-19 pandemic. We acted very swiftly and we changed our policies and our procedures. We've been able to temporarily modify our policies, and I think modification of policies in a crisis is something that people need to think about if they are to sustain the learning. And we've encouraged creativity and innovation, and those are a few things that I would say that have actually kept us going even during the COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and Stephen, for describing that partnership. I think it's so rich to hear about all of the different pivots that happened. So Terrace and Matthew, I will turn it over to you all. Terrace, I think you're going to get us started by framing out the ways you all have worked together.
Yeah, John and Stephen, such an inspiring story of collaboration. I feel like this is very therapeutic as we all are survivors of COVID and what was happening during those times. My entry into the space started in Shanghai, China, on a call with my parents. My mom was freaking out. You have to get home right now. Something's happening there. And I was like, yeah, like something's happening. But not wanting to leave because there in China, there was an opportunity to develop at that time an augmented reality app for young children. And I was expressing at that time that it was a time of advocacy for young children and the fact that they would be stuck indoors. And I passionately asked my father, because I was trying to close a deal there in the city, could you please allow me to pilot? The only way I'll come home is if I can pilot an engagement with children from different walks of life in Baltimore City. And he called his dear friend, Rabbi Wahlberg. Now, a little frame, my father's a pastor here in Baltimore City, a graduate of Towson University, and at the time had been engaging in a relationship, an intimate relationship with kind of famous and really engaging rabbi here in the city. And as I transitioned back, they were able to organize educators, young people at my church, and bring together 30 children. And my father said, you really need to call Towson University, and connected me with Matthew, who he had been working with at that time. At the same exact time, when COVID hit in Baltimore City, there was a major disparity around vaccines and access to vaccines. And my father ended up organizing 700 churches at that time to really support people of color in Baltimore City to be able to get access to vaccines, and brought a lot of universities kind of to the table through that effort. And we sat around our home thinking about how we would mobilize this kind of engagement for children. And Towson University kind of came in as a main partner. I call Matthew Dorridan coach. He's coached me in every single way, providing me with like technical training and support, but also listening to my father and I kind of berate around the racism and white supremacy in our city at the time. The frame of all of the years of community engagement in universities where we've studied people in the city like lab rats, and not really making a real connection to the community. And we had a friend in Coach and in Towson, and they listened. They started by listening. And our effort at that time was to say children, young children, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, who I've taught for 15 years before, were stuck indoors, and they needed a platform to get them outside and engaging as we were preparing to go into that following school year. And so Coach kind of introduced me to the team there at Towson, gave us an app, stood by kind of my side as we organized these young people from a synagogue and a church. And from there, we were able to see the power of research with R2 and R1 schools here in your university systems here in the States. What we've seen there is that the university structures here in America have been that transboundary organization between the community and a lot of times resources through whether it be National Science Foundation or different arms. And so this effort with Towson expanded to over 15 universities up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and a real research for the faith leaders in Baltimore around who we can trust and what things we can change inside of the system. And we launched Temple X Schools as an effort to bring these social justice warriors in our communities, faith leaders, and researchers to the table to create something real here in Baltimore. We've seen who's real and who's not, and who's humble enough to listen to the community. We don't speak truth to power. We are the power. And again, I stand here and I wouldn't do it with a lot of universities in Baltimore, but we stand with Towson in the fact that they have adapted policies and things for an emergency situation, not to right the wrongs of COVID, but to right the wrongs of the past. I'm a leader now on leadership team at Baltimore Ecosystem Study. We are pushing into as many research spaces as possible. We have a firm partnership with USDA Forest Service, as well as Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. We've been able to understand research institutions from this framework, and the provost there, the president there, and my father, to be honest, is like, we got to do this at Towson. So his community of alumni, which is really, really important, have helped us to kind of push this through. I'm gonna, hand this over. I always kind of start this conversation from the community point of view, but I know that Coach was going through a whole nother war on his side to get things through. I'll just mention that last summer, we had 16 of his young people supporting us in creating sacred spaces for young children around Baltimore. We've launched and opened spaces with protection from BPD, with researchers from the best institutions in our country there to serve children in spaces that the faith institutions own. This is a private school model, and we are honored to work with Towson as the founding university to help us to set policies for all universities that we come in contact with across the country. So thanks again, and I'll hand it to you, Coach.
Okay, funny story. So last summer when we had that cohort, which was a great project, and I can elaborate that a bit on that too. But summer, so I was wearing my kicks, I was wearing loose clothes, and my student said, "You look like you're about to go coach a soccer team or a climbing instructor." So I said, "Okay, if y'all think I look like a coach, you can call me Coach." and was the worst mistake I've ever made. Right? It's great. I love terms of endearment, self-deprecation. It's great. I don't think I could say it much better than Terrace in the sense that I think what I enjoy is that I'm able to bring my disciplinary perspective into this work. As a cultural anthropologist, field work, participant observation, collaboration, real ethics when it comes to doing engagement work. And so institutionally, sometimes it can be a bit of a barrier. I'm sure some of the community engagement folks in the space know what it's like to get the work like this, recognized for promotion and tenure. And so I am, another nickname I have at Towson is faculty whisperer. And I think that's sometimes what it takes, is that you need someone who can navigate between the administrative space and the faculty space in order to make sure that the work is not only being recognized, but is also being resourced and supported, and all the other machinations that need to go around that. So the partnership with Terrace and his father has been amazingly rewarding for a number of reasons. One, why would it not be awesome to hang out in a former rec center, now church, with a bunch of kids? And there is for those of you not familiar with duck pin bowling, it's like little bowling alleys. There's a bowling alley in the church. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. And that's what's great, because it's such great work. But the adaptations with COVID and what have you, we did I'll just mention two things real quick. We have a large transportation piece. In 2019, we spent $85,000 as an institution just on community engagement based research, but that was also the institution recognizing that transportation's a big part of doing this work, getting folks onto campus and getting folks from the campus into the community, and not always with the university emblazoned bus, because you have to be cognizant of what you're bringing in. We don't want to create poverty tourism and other things along those lines. So we try to be really thoughtful. I love putting faculty, staff, and students on old school yellow buses, because that means we're there to learn, and the education is coming from the community. The resources that were allocated to that, the running joke, how do you do community engagement when you can't engage your community? But we tried to find ways around that during COVID. We reallocated those resources to fund 18 students as research assistants for faculty. We accomplished that in 2 weeks. And now several of those students have gone on to make those projects that we're doing with faculty that we supported as thesis projects and what have you. The other thing, as Terrace was mentioning with the app, my colleague Samuel Collins and I have developed a couple of different methodologies called networked anthropology and multimodal anthropology, coming soon on Routledge. And one of the things, I think some people call this hacking, we call it creative misuse. So we like to take free tools online, like walking tour platforms and templates. And that's what Terrace and I first started collaborating on, was how to translate the work of a platform that was meant for museum walking tours into, or we could turn it into a social justice and structural violence tour in Baltimore. Not necessarily what the app was intended for, but something that we creatively misused a bit too. So I know we're going to get into some more details here in a bit, but yeah, it's a real privilege, and I almost wanted to petition that we just listen to John talk about the work in Rwanda and Stephen, because to see that not just happening internationally, but the structural conditions that you're changing are so, it really reminds me of like of Partners in Health and other organizations that recognize that you can't just address the issue, you have to address the structural conditions around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's a great, I think, segue, Matthew, in a lot of ways. I think that both through listening to both of, or all four of you, both of your pairs today, as well as in our conversations leading up to today, I think a few things that kind of stood out to me as someone who's worked in the field of community engagement for a long time, you know, from each of your examples in different ways and some overlapping ones, is really a few things. So one is that like structural piece, right? Like what is it to both say, hey, I think there's a problem and I think we have maybe some potential solutions to contribute to that, but then to be able to, and I think John and Stephen, your example so aptly illustrates being able to say, actually, that thing we thought you needed is not that thing. Like, we need to back way up, right? Like, we need to really say, hey, yeah, maybe we'll get there at some point, but what we need to get to first are all of these other things. And we can also accomplish our shared goals by doing that as well. And so I think that ability to, you know, pivot and really listen to one another is huge. And it comes out of, again, but both of your examples. I think another thing that stands out to me listening to both of you today, both pairs today, is really that this work is so deeply relational, but it also requires the adjustment of policies, procedures, and infrastructure to match those relationships, right? And so Matthew, you were just giving the example of the transportation investment. And I think, you know, Stephen and John, in your example, really thinking through, okay, how are we going to make this work during the pandemic when we can't actually come together and do this installation? And how are we going to adjust the sorts of things we're training people on and bringing them together on around that is really powerful. And then I think another thing that probably stands out to all of us listening to this is the longevity of these relationships, right? Like, it's not just a drop in, do it and leave, but there's really a thought of sustainability and kind of ongoing evolution of the relationships and what they can be and what they need to become into the future. I think all of that takes a lot of trust building. And so I actually want to open it up to each of you in kind of a more of a popcorn style, like a 2-minute quick hit. What words of wisdom do you have for what it takes to build the type of trust you each have found with one another? And also part of that trust being shared accountability. So I'm going to go in kind of reverse order this time. So Matthew, we're going to start with you and then come back the other way.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to drop a few links in the chat just so people can follow up on it. But I think I'll go back to the kind of enjoying the anthropological methodology in that there's a recognition. Some things are transactional, right? All right, everyone put on a matching t-shirt, go paint a wall in an underserved community. Or what you could do is hire 2 local painters to be educators for that group and not usurp their capital. So I think it's just coming in with those kind of structural conditions. We as a discipline are often annoying in the type of discussions and questions that we're trying to bring to the table. But my team will tell you and my colleagues that this is one of my standard jokes, but you know, real time, academic time, bureaucratic time, right? And institutions tend to stay in that long, low speed because it's beneficial to do so. We try to operate in the nimble real time space. And with that being said, with it being undergirded through long-term rapport building and trust, and it can be anecdotal, it can be larger structural things that take more time, but not over-promising, you know, not promising the moon and the stars. I think there's another large institution in Baltimore that you may have heard of that does great work internationally, but not so much in its backyard. So there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of communities in Baltimore have suffered from structural violence, and a lot of that structural violence has come from higher ed institutions, and to be cognizant of that and recognize it, and also to ensure that you're working against it, that you're asking those tough questions. Just real quick, a quick tool too. You know, one of the things that we've worked on with some community partners is intellectual property and ownership. And so with Terrace, with other partners as well, my university council doesn't like me too much because I'm like, what if we did a Creative Commons contract where ownership is owned by the community and by the institution, and both can do what they want to with it, right? And that causes some consternation, but I think it's one of those things to address. Okay, here's the history of the structural inequities that have been in place that are racialized highly, especially in a place like Baltimore, and what can we do to usurp those structurally, right? And that's where the real collaboration hits the road, in terms of really trying to push the institution to work with our partners, to work with our engagement folks, to try to move that dial, and not just, like I said, volunteerism, transaction, civic engagement, all well and good. But at the same time too, what are we doing to actually address the inequities, the long-term inequities, and what can we do to push those in new directions?
Yeah, and I would say, just to piggyback that, for us from the community, and we tried and trust with our community not to focus on hero worship, right? We were focused on scale and coming to Towson with our family and providing a value proposition. At one moment, I remember there being 15 different professors on a Zoom or, in a room that were doing different projects disconnected from each other in the city of Baltimore. And so the value proposition was to say, why don't you house everything here and we're all working together? Let's prove something together. And because it was relational, because there's a love, for Towson in a way, I think there are opportunities to use this kind of structuring. We advocate for the faith institution, not in the realm of religion or faith, but in the realm of organization, history, the anthropology that I know is being studied in the spaces, but also the power. And so matching these power mechanisms, but also we've been really focused on is indirect rate and IP and ownership, because we're the sustainable source of community engagement. And we are looking to create a 100-year plan, not a 2-year plan with these institutions. So it was great to come together during a rush, but amazing that our foundation was focused on how do we institutionalize all that we do and give it back to the people.
John, and then Stephen, we'll kick it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I will not repeat what other colleagues have mentioned, but I think from my perspective, I would say, I think commitment to long-term mutual benefit is something that we really value, and not just saying we want to invest into this and then we are going to get a benefit tomorrow. So that commitment to long-term mutual benefit is the one that has kept us going. And I think, as I earlier mentioned, the collaborative mindset, always to think of, fairness and not being self-centered, and just putting oneself in the shoes of his or her colleagues, I think can cement relationship and build it trust. Thank you.
Yeah, there are just so many things that we could talk about and should talk about. So there is, for the sake of time, I'll just point to a couple of things. First, John and I, well, John's team and our team has been working together for 10 years. We started working together in 2013. I think that proves that we both are getting something that we need, that we want from it. Otherwise, it would not last this long. And also the projects are getting bigger and bigger. The first time we took a team of students to Rwanda, I think we talked about 10, 15 students. This coming summer, we plan to take roughly 100 people to Rwanda, about 60, 70 from Hong Kong, including our university, some high school. We are going to take another 20, about 20 students from other foreign universities, not from our own, from China, and I think Korea and Philippines and so on. That's how much we trust each other, how much we are, benefiting from the relationship. as to how do we work, put this together. We believe people is the most important element. As John has mentioned just now, during the pandemic, we could not travel, so we do things online. We actually ship solar panels to Rwanda, and then we guide the local volunteers to install solar panels, and it did work. We actually installed 200 sets of solar panels this way. But as John has also mentioned, the work was done, but the personal relationship was very difficult to build through a two-dimensional screen where you cannot actually touch each other. I mean, no, not that we actually physically touch each other, but there is no personal contact. Right? It's 2D. There is no three-dimensional relationship. So we always stress on the relationship. Before we send our students to places like Rwanda or any other places, we actually work not just in Rwanda, we also work in Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, Myanmar before the army took over, and Indonesia. Of course, in mainland China and Hong Kong, actually the vast majority of our projects are in Hong Kong and mainland China. But everywhere we aim to build a long-term relationship. We train our students to focus on what the other party actually needs from us. What do they want? What do they need from us? And we try to satisfy that need. So we have, I think many people have already mentioned this. We try to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and what does it look like? What does it feel like from the other side? That's something that we feel is the test of whether we are doing the right thing. Let me just stop here. Otherwise, I will keep going and we'll never stop.
There's so much to these, and I know our time is so short. I think one thing, and Stephen, I'll just piggyback on something that you were just speaking to, but I think it came up in the first set of comments as well, and I know I'll speak for myself, often on my heart and mind as someone who's working with students and with faculty. And once things kind of scale up to really, you're giving the thing that you've built trust and a relationship around to someone else to steward, right? And so really thinking about the ways that we're bringing folks into these relationships and really hoping that we prepared them well to cherish them in the same ways that we do. And that the trust is there. So if and when that doesn't happen for some reason, that, we're able to kind of move forward past those points. And so I think that certainly, I think is a piece of, I think, both of the stories of your partnerships. I love this piece of that I think kind of came out of both of your stories, which is really like not over promising, right? And you said that in a very straightforward way, Matthew, like this notion of like, how do we scope out something that we can work on together and kind of build from there versus like, we're going to try to solve all of the problems of the world together. And I think that really thinking about the ways that transparency can happen, and the ways that you have that check-in with one another, that accountability piece of like, how is this going? And a good marker of that things are working is that you keep showing up with one another, right? And so I think that those are all really important things to think about around not just how to build trust, but how to know that you've built trust, right? And those temperature checks on that. So knowing that we're coming close to our time, what I want to do is I'm going to just hand it over to each of your pairs, and you can kind of riff off this however you would like. So give each of you about 5 minutes to talk about where are you going from here in your partnerships. And then is there anything you heard from the other kind of partnership pair today that stands out to you, resonates with you, or that you're kind of taking with you as you continue to think about your work together? So John and Stephen, I will turn it over to you first to talk a little bit about where you're going from here and what you gleaned from Matthew and Paris today.
Right. Let me start, and then I'll ask John to complete it. We just plan to go on doing what we've been doing and build bigger things. And I already mentioned, I already told you what we are planning to do for this summer. But one thing that I should also mention is John is really, really resourceful. And one of the things that we are doing now is he has introduced us to our another partner in Tanzania, kind of a neighbor, a bigger country to the east of Rwanda on the coast, on the East African coast. So in about, I think, half a year's time and maybe 1 year's time, we're going to send another team to Tanzania with John's help, repeating some of the things and exploring some new projects. And so as much as we can do, we'll continue. But I want to pick up one thing that I learned from Terence and Matthew. It is, people talk about leadership all the time. We actually talk about leadership in our university a lot, very often in conjunction with service learning. What I pick up from them is that leadership is about action. It's not just about talking, presenting the grand truths and so on and so forth. It is concrete action that is genuine, that really makes an impact, changing the structure, building up structure, building relationships. That is important. That's also something that we learned. But I got a reaffirmation from their team that the real action is what we need. So, John.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I think we've been working with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University for quite a long time, and we've been involved in the solar panels and computers. But as I was telling you, 69% of our population depends on agriculture, and the land is not increasing. Our population is growing 3% per year. So I think one thing that we are likely to explore with the leadership of the university, and I think Stephen is going to be our advocate, is to see how technology can actually help us to help our young people to do more with less, because land will always be small and small, we get smaller and smaller. And I think technology can actually be of can be a very good tool to help young people to get the best out of the smallest land that they have. So that's something that we are going to think about. What is it that has stood out from the discussion? I think there are quite a lot of things that I've heard and appreciated, but in the interest of time, I'll just mention the coaching. I think we are having a problem with the less of our population, 22% can actually use internet. And I think if we are to resolve that challenge, then we need to think of this concept of coaching. Get few who can really say it out, and then the few who will understand it can actually pull the majority that we cannot be able to change or empower within the shortest possible time. Thank you.
I guess, man, I'll jump in really fast, and I want to start by saying I'm just so inspired by the legacy of 10 years, and just thinking about, just to start there, how much of the ups and downs you had to go through together as partners, but then also, John, your connection to your community, knowing the need, and Stephen, your connection, understanding the young people and the demographics and how they come together. I think, Coach and I are at this really beautiful space where he's trying to tell me to, like, all right, man, what can we bite off? Like, we don't want to go too big, but also a city that's, resource rich, outcome poor. We have founded the Baltimore Forest School in collaboration with USDA Forest Service and Baltimore City Public Schools, which is an effort really looking at all of the faith spaces in Baltimore City, their actual private land, and how we use that for environmental justice. I think as we apply for, long-term funding with Towson University that kind of house that and look at the anthropology department, we're looking to really build out, again, the learned from this other partnership infrastructure of Baltimore when it comes to data usage, when it comes to the systems by which we study the environment, but also the ways we get young people involved. The last thing I'll say is we have a new governor in the state who is really passionate about service learning and is bringing to the table a service year. Our projects now with multiple universities strategically take your college students and young people and place them in partnership with kindergartners. And so last week I'll mention that Howard University students made birdhouses for kindergarten classrooms in Baltimore City schools. My Morehouse brothers and undergraduates at Morehouse cut trees down from the Federation, which I'm a part of Southern Cooperatives in Alabama, cut those trees down to bring them up from Morehouse to Howard to make these birdhouses. This is the kind of programming that we're developing with Towson as kind of the core of helping us with universities. So I'm very inspired by the fact that it can work and it can change communities. So thank you, John and Stephen, for sharing. And Coach.
Yeah, no, thank you, Terrace. And John, Stephen, y'all's journey together is really inspirational. And I think that's really part of it too, is it's the being ready to be in for the long term. And what I took from John and Stephen, which is honestly, I don't think said enough, that the work needs to be mutually beneficial. And you need to recognize that there's capital coming on both sides in terms of the principle of debt incurred for your collaborators, but also harnessing the resources that are out there and also changing the power dynamics as well. Like for instance, we're about to put in for an NSF REU, or research experience for undergraduates, based on the work that we've been able to do over the last 2 years, particularly with Terrace and Temple X. And in doing so, Terrace isn't just our subject matter expert, he's our co-PI. All right. I've got other examples too, somewhat anecdotal, but meaningful, in that if you're not familiar with the journal Engage out of IUPUI, it's a really great online community engagement journal, but we put out a piece on our walking tour app development that we did with 4 young Black women from the ages of 9 to 12, and they are our co-authors on that piece. Right. And so their names are on the banner. And, you know, I don't think a 9-year-old in West Baltimore is necessarily thinking about the CV, but it's still important to note those things. So I think it's like a continuum between the symbolic and somewhat anecdotal, or even a little bit transactional, to what Stephen, John, and Terrace have all talked about, is that the real work happens when we start addressing the structural conditions and finding out ways to resource. And quite honestly, coming out of COVID, I think that's, not to be too verbose here, but the salvation piece for higher ed. In other words, if you're not coming to collaborate, then what are you doing, right? And if you want to be proprietary, you shouldn't be in the space. You know, it's not only colonial in terms of thinking, but we do as well as Baltimore City does. And that has to be recognized, that you're not removed from it, you're part of it. And I often refer to a piece that one of my mentors wrote about, you sometimes speak with and alongside feels a little bit better, or maybe as the students would say, STFU. Maybe you should just shut up and listen. And that's a really, really important skill set.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those reflections, both on your own partnerships, but on one another's as well. After having 2 separate conversations with you all, I was really excited to see what sorts of things you might glean from one another. We do have one question that has come through in the chat, and I think obviously this is specifically for John and Stephen, around language differences. How do you, and I know that was a big curiosity of mine when we were having our discussion. And so, yeah, I would love for you to talk about that, because I think that in the same way Matthew just was talking about how Towson is only going to be as strong as Baltimore City is, I think your partnership really shows that we have a global humanity connection as well. And Hong Kong Polytechnic U can only be as strong as you know, John's organization in Rwanda is, and the access that folks have to knowledge and the internet there. And so, but as you scope out, you come across different sorts of challenges, like language differences. So yeah, would love to hear you all talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, I'll start. That language issue is part of the reason why we need partners such as John's organization. because his organization has a lot of people who can speak English as well as the local language, and he also help us to find and recruit local young people who can speak both languages. So when we take our students to Rwanda, we usually there is an equal number, sometimes even larger group of local people working with our students. So they act as the translators, helpers, interpreters, and they do everything that our students cannot do. Yeah, but in return, we train them in all the technology, the skills about solar panels, computers, IT, and so on. And as John mentioned, we need them to, because they are there. They live. Some of them actually live in the village, so they are there to fix problems when it happens and then do little repairs and things like that. Actually, after we left, they know everything about installing solar panels.
I think Stephen has said it well, so thank you.
Great. Well, I know that some people had to sign off at the hour, and I know that we're coming up on our time, and I have a few announcements. So I don't want to discourage people from continuing to have conversations or ask questions, but also want to make sure that we wrap up by our time, so that we're able to send folks on their way. So certainly feel free to reach out to me. Star and Cami are here from the Special Programming Committee, as well as our administrator for IRSlice, Tiana. And so if folks have other questions or want to be put in touch with any of today's panelists, I don't want to volunteer you all, but I'm sure they would be willing to continue the conversation with anyone who has joined us today. So I want to thank everyone for your time, attention, and engagement over the last hour and hour plus, and to share, like I said, a few reminders on behalf of IRSlice. So the first one is there was another panel, in case you missed it, around rural engagement. So the focus of today was urban engagement. And there was a first part of this webinar series around rural engagement that was recorded. And so Tiana is going to be putting some links in the chat to help folks find those. So if you'd like to watch that was facilitated by Cami, who is on today's call as well. Our IRSlice conference will be taking place in October in New Orleans, and our call for proposals and the registration are open for that. So would encourage and would love to see any and all of you in person in New Orleans in October if you're able to attend. We have a program coming up in partnership with several other organizations in the field called Dissertation Dish. This one will be featuring Dr. Trina Van Skyndel on Thursday, June 8th from 10 to 11:30 Pacific time. And then finally, we have a series of monthly community conversations. It's an open forum to bring discussion topics, research ideas, and problems of practice for IRSlice. And our next one will be taking place next week on May 24th at 12 p.m. Pacific time as well. So just wanted to make sure people had all of that information so you can join us for other IRSlice and partnership happenings. And I want to finish today just really by thanking with deep gratitude, Matthew, Terrace, John, and Stephen for sharing your perspectives and wisdom so generously with all of us. I know that I am, and I hope everyone here is taking something away to think about, marinate on, and move forward on as we engage in this work collectively. So again, a deep gratitude to all of you for the time that you spent with us today, and just very, very grateful for that, and inspired as well. So hopefully folks are feeling that way too. Thank you everyone for your time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thanks very much.